2024 is the year of elections, and the largest ever number of voters in at least 64 countries have voted or will head to the polls for a national election. In countries where vote counts are complete, unexpected results have surprised voters and the world, leading many to speculate on the potential changes and global impact these outcomes might bring. All this while U.S. President Biden strives to overcome his debate crisis with just about 4 months to go until the November presidential election. Meanwhile, Russian President Putin, after his re-election in March, has been holding a rush of summits with his old friends to break his diplomatic isolation and to get Russia's much needed help in its prolonged fight against Ukraine. Changing landscape of global affairs. That's the topic of our discussion today. And to break down the implications of the aforementioned stories, we have Lee Hee-eun, Dean and Professor of Law at Handong International Law School, joining us via Skype. It's always great to have you with us.
A pleasure to be back on the program.
We'd also like to welcome Bruce Klingner, Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation, who joins us from Washington, D.C. It's so great to see you again.
Well, thank you for having me.
All right, Dr. Klingner, let's start off with you. President Biden, amid rising Democrats' concerns after his relatively poor debate performance, held an interview with local media ABC News. What were the key points of discussion, and do you think it helped in quelling concerns?
Really, all of the topics were related to President Biden's poor debate performance and whether it reflects a deteriorating mental condition due to his age. So the interviewer, kept coming back to, do you really think you're up to an election, not only the election, but then subsequent 4 years of serving as president? And President Biden kept trying to allay those concerns. So President Biden kept pointing to his accomplishments during his term, but then the interviewer just kept coming back to, do you really think you can do it? There's a lot of rising concern. So Biden did point to successes such as the economy, expanding NATO, getting Japan to expand its military defense spending, and then the signing of the AUKUS submarine agreement. And then there was a bit of a dispute between the interviewer and Biden over polling numbers. George Stephanopoulos said that Biden's numbers are low, that they're below Trump. And President Biden disputed those, saying that he thought his numbers were higher. And then he would point to President Trump's debate performance, highlighting that the fact finders had found that President Trump had misspoken at least 27 times. So I don't think it quelled any concerns. In fact, here in the United States, we're seeing rising calls by Democratic members of Congress for Biden to resign or to not run in the coming election.
Well, President Biden's age has consistently been a concern, but it looks like it has become particularly prominent this time, leading many to call for an end to his re-election campaign. And it looks like the interview with the ABC News, like you said, did little to quell concerns. But President Biden keeps stressing that he's up for the job. So we'll see how things play out from this point on. Professor Lee, President Biden is also expected to be at the center of attention at the NATO summit, slated to kick off tomorrow. The alliance's resurgence since Russia's invasion of Ukraine is widely seen as Biden's signature achievement, but some analyze that Biden's uncertain future will likely overshadow the summit. What strategy do you expect from the U.S. leader during this week's summit?
Well, he has to certainly show, and this is primarily to a domestic audience. I mean, he's playing to two different audiences here. One is certainly, as Dr. Klingner was noting in terms of the interview with President Biden, that because of his disastrous debate performance, there's a lot of people who are concerned about whether he can actually serve out a second term. And so what he's going to have to show, obviously, that he's in command of all his faculties, that he is the leader of the free world. And the NATO summit is a perfect opportunity for him to do that. So in a normal circumstance, if we weren't talking about his health, he would certainly, I think, highlight some of the major accomplishments that he's achieved during his 3.5 years in office. And that is, including 2 new members to NATO, Finland and Sweden. And then, of course, dealing with the whole crisis in Ukraine. mobilizing NATO and sort of really being at the forefront of the United States effort to sort of help Ukraine particularly fend off Russia's invasion. But because of the persisting questions about his health and his faculties generally, because of the debate performance, there are so many diplomats around the world and world leaders who are just shocked by what he did in that debate. And so at the summit, you're going to probably, at least not publicly anyway, but certainly I'm sure leaders around the world and NATO officials are going to be watching very carefully whether or not, in fact, Biden is up to the job and whether or not he's able to actually commend himself in such a way that will present to NATO allies as well as to the American public and to the rest of the world that he has the ability to take this position on as President of the United States, as basically sort of leading NATO into this phase of history, countering Russian invasion. But I think the strategy here is to try to really salvage some sense of leadership for his campaign. And I think that will be the main focus for Biden going into the summit.
NATO will celebrate 75 years of strong and most enduring alliance in recorded history when they meet in Washington this week. And the alliance's solidarity is a signature achievement of Mr. Biden. But as you hinted, there is growing skepticism among NATO members about his re-election chances. So we'll see how he overcomes the challenge. Meanwhile, in the UK, incoming Prime Minister, actually he is the new Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, has led his centre-left Labour Party to victory, its first victory in 19 years since under the leadership of Tony Blair. Professor Lee, what major changes are expected in Britain's domestic and foreign policies?
So actually on paper, with respect to sort of foreign policy, there's actually very little difference between Labour and the Conservative Party with respect to issues that relate to, let's say, Ukraine and basically climate change, major sort of concerns for the international community. I think one of the starkest differences, I think, at least played out in the campaign, is on the question of migration. And there was a big issue within the UK about sending sort of migrants or asylum seekers to Rwanda. And there was a big case in the UK courts about this. And basically, the current Labour Party has said basically we're going to completely reverse that. That policy was basically dead on arrival, and so they're going to put a halt to this policy of sending asylum seekers to Rwanda. But with respect to sort of other issues, again, very stark, not much difference in terms of for example, like the issues of Brexit, which is traditionally, the Labour Party was not in favor of Brexit, but Keir Starmer, the new Prime Minister, interestingly, I think has integrated that he is going to, and with his appointments, is assigned more conservative elements within the Labour Party to positions. And the previous leader, Jeremy Corbyn, I mean, he was basically pushed out of the party. That was represented a more sort of left-leaning, more leftist orientation to Labour. So he represents, I think the new Prime Minister represents an interesting sort of shift within the Labour Party to sort of appeal more center-left within the British electorate and its policies. And, with respect to domestic policies, I mean, particularly there's an emphasis here on setting up a great British energy, a publicly owned clean power company, basically dealing with the NHS, the health service. There are lots of issues there, and reducing crime has been a big focus also of his administration. So I think what you'll see is Labour in this case has been sort of not a party of protest, as he sort of indicated some years ago, that as he took office as part of the head of the Labour Party, he's interested in a party that will have the power to govern. And so we'll see in the next 100 days whether or not he'll be able to implement these policies and really put Labour in a position to govern the country for the next, for the remaining, at least for the foreseeable future, until there's another election.
And Dr. Klingner, according to reports, Starmer has expressed his admiration for President Biden, with his Labor Party aligned philosophically with the U.S. Democrats. But David Lammy, the U.K. government's likely foreign secretary, has openly disparaged former U.S. President Trump in the past, referring to him as a quote-unquote profound threat to the international order. How would the U.S. November presidential election impact the new British government?
Well, as Dr. Lee pointed out, that right now there would be very little foreign policy differences between the new Labour government in the UK and the Biden administration. But if President Trump is reelected, there's, I think, certainly a greater likelihood of differences between the UK and the US. Now, we don't know what President Trump's policies would be during a second term. But if we look back on the first, I think there certainly would be much differences between Trump and Biden, and then with the UK on the U.S. views of the alliances. Mr. Trump has long held a very skeptical view, or certainly a less supportive view of alliances than usual presidents or standard presidents from the past, both Republican and Democrat. And he certainly has made a concerted push to have our allies, particularly NATO allies, pay more of their budget towards defense spending. So in the past, both with NATO and Asian allies, President Trump threatened to reduce or remove U.S. forces if he didn't believe that the allies had been pulling their weight and putting enough of their GDP spending towards defense. I think another major area of difference would be support to Ukraine. President Trump has shown great skepticism for the U.S. to spend money on supporting Ukraine. He believes that NATO should be pulling its weight on that, as well as increasing its spending and really taking the lion's share of responsibility for a crisis in their backyard. The special relationship with the U.S., between the U.S. and U.K., has long been particularly important to both countries. So we'll see if President Trump's reelection sort of alters the basic foundation of that. And finally, I think another area of possible difference would be on China. The President Trump, as well as President Biden, have been very strong, highlighting the growing threat China poses not only to the Indo-Pacific region, but economically really to the world. So the U.S. has been very strong in pushing our allies and partners to take a stronger stance against China's various transgressions, not only territorial, but also business issues. So I think we'll have to see how much of a difference there is, but certainly much greater chance for strains in the relationship if President Trump is reelected.
And staying with you, Dr. Klingner, turbulent times ahead for the Western Alliance, for NATO, as the ruling parties of both Britain and France, major pillars of the alliance, along with the U.S., have suffered crushing defeats. Now, France's left-wing coalition did win in the second voting round of parliamentary elections on Sunday in a stunning reversal, but nonetheless, there is a clear resurgence of a far-right wave in Europe. And on top of this, Trump's possible comeback is adding to the uncertainties. Do you expect some major shifts or some major turbulence in the global security dynamics going forward?
Well, focusing first on France, certainly quite a change from what had been predicted after the first round of voting, where it had seemed the far-right party was going to gain the lead in the government. Now with a reversal by the voters and embracing the far left or the center left, really I think it's a lot of uncertainty as to not only what the form of the French government will be. Some have called for Macron to resign, and he said he won't do that. So we're not really sure what the coalition will be, and then uncertainty as to what the policies would be. But I think if the far left party really takes the lead in setting foreign policy, it's going to certainly be more turbulent than under the Macron government. So there are questions as to what the far left party would be. I think certainly questions on support to Ukraine, France's role in NATO, as well as France's support for the international coalition trying to push back against Chinese transgressions. I think the far left is seen as is softer on China. And then I think just more broadly with the uncertainties of the recent arising from the recent French election and then what will happen in the U.S. election, certainly a lot of uncertainty, concern, and just not really knowing how those three nations will get along, as well as what their policies will be and how effective the NATO coalition will be against Ukraine, as well as the broader international community effort against China.
Meanwhile, Professor Lee, Indian Prime Minister Modi headed to Russia today to hold talks with Russian President Putin on his first trip to the country since the Ukraine war began. The Kremlin has said that the two leaders will discuss prospects for further development of traditionally friendly Russian-Indian relations and other issues of mutual concern. What's expected from his closely watched visit?
Well, this particular visit is rather, I think, more complicated now because India is in sort of regional competition with China, and I think as far as rivals are concerned, the India-China relationship, particularly on the border regions, right? There's been actual conflict between the two sides on the border, and given the size of both nations in the region, they're vying for obviously, influence in the general area. So I think that relationship between India and China, I think, brings into question sort of the questions about India's relationship to Russia, because of course Russia has sort of made a point to become closer to China to some degree, even though they have been seen to be, in a sense, sometimes rivals. Given the war in Ukraine, China has really stayed away from openly criticizing Russia, and of course, China being now a sort of a buyer of Russian oil, as well as other goods. I think Russia and China, that their relationship has sort of improved, of course, over time. And so this visit by Modi to Russia, I think, signals something in terms of maintaining a relationship, which I think India sees Russia as, of course, a very important relationship, because India purchases a lot of arms from Russia, and that has become more challenging, of course, with Russia's involvement in Ukraine. A lot of arms are being sent to Ukraine in terms of fighting the war there. So, India has seen a slight reduction in terms of arms sales from Russia, but India, of course, is still a large purchaser of oil and gas. And one of the, I think, aspects of this relationship that's going to be addressed by Modi into Russia is to maintain that relationship, but also to address sort of the trade imbalance between the two countries. And so one of Modi's, I think, purposes of visiting Russia is to address that trade imbalance by encouraging Russia to purchase more Indian products and Indian goods to Russia to sort of offset this imbalance. But in terms of overall, the India-Russia relationship, I think, should be seen certainly in context of this competition between India and China. And so I think Russia plays an interesting role in that, because India doesn't want to see Russia necessarily siding with China, and basically wants Russia to sort of stay out of any issues between India and China in terms of this competition between the two sides, because I think it would be very certainly bad for India if Russia took a side on China's end and then sort of tilts the balance in favor of China in the region. So I think Modi is going there to reassert and sort of re-energize relations between the two sides, as you mentioned, since the start of the Ukraine war. And India has taken really not a position to sort of openly criticize Russia in that regard. And the fact that they're willing to meet together in this context, I think, signals that India really believes, of course, Russia to be a very important relationship that it needs to maintain.
All right, we have a few more grounds to cover, but we are running short on time, so we'll jump right to our final question. Dr. Klingner, it appears we are now seeing signs of a changing landscape of global affairs amid cozying Russia-North Korea-China relations and leadership shifts in the Western alliance. From your perspective, how should South Korea navigate through these uncertain times?
Well, first, I'd like to highlight the truly outstanding work that President Yoon has done in strengthening the trilateral relationship amongst the United States, Japan, and Korea. really, quite a bold initiative in restoring relations with Japan, and that has enabled a restoration of relations as well as a real strengthening of the trilateral military and security cooperation. On the broader stage, though, there's still questions as to what Korea's policies will be. President Yoon has had very strong words on Korea assuming a larger role in the Indo-Pacific, including a security role, and then on the global stage as well as a global pivotal state. But we've seen less accomplishments on that than we have seen in strengthening the alliance with the U.S. as well as the relationship with Japan. So in looking forward from the U.S., the viewpoint would be that Korea lives in a very bad neighborhood, and that rather than trying to continue a balancing between its security guarantor, the U.S., and its main economic partner, China, that South Korea needs to continue, as President Yoon has done, embracing the relationship with the U.S. as a way of deterring Chinese as well as North Korean adventurism, and then also diversifying Korea's economy away from China, and that would reduce Beijing's ability to leverage or intimidate or coerce Korea on political and diplomatic issues. We've also seen President Yoon seems more hesitant than other nations in calling out Russia and Chinese transgressions. And so I think moving forward, we would be looking for Korea to play a larger role, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. And then we're looking for what he will do to strengthen the relationship also with Europe. We've seen the Asia-Pacific four nations have done a very good job so far, although still preliminary, on strengthening the relations between Atlantic and Indo-Pacific democracies to counter both Russia and China.
And that is the perfect place to end our discussion today. Thank you so much, Dr. Klingner, as always, for your brilliant analysis.
Thank you very much.
And many thanks to you as well, Professor Lee, for sharing your valuable insights.
Well, thanks for having me again.
And that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you for watching, and be sure to tune in same time tomorrow to join our conversation. Goodbye for now.